Bienvenue à tous pour cette deuxième séance de séminaire organisée conjointement au CNRS et à l'American University of Paris où vous vous trouvez aujourd'hui. Donc cette deuxième séance, elle est consacrée au Made in France. Et en fait, comme vous avez peut-être compris, depuis la reprise du séminaire avec l'université, on veut un peu déconstruire l'histoire de la mode française, aller derrière ce qu'on connaît déjà. Et donc, le thème de cette saison est Deconstructing Paris Fashion towards the de-hierarchized narrative. L'idée, c'est vraiment d'aller derrière Dior et Chanel et de comprendre ce qu'il en est. Donc aujourd'hui, on questionne cette notion du Made in France à travers la question des techniques et des savoir-faire. Et on se pose des questions suivantes, on espère pouvoir y répondre avec vous. De quoi est faite la mode que l'on appelle la mode parisienne, la mode française? Est-ce que c'est vraiment le résultat seulement de savoir-faire français, ancestraux, ou est-ce qu'en fait on a des échanges de techniques, de compétences venant d'autres pays? D'abord, à travers lequel la broderie indienne utilisée par de nombreuses marques de luxe parisienne, et à travers le cas de la délocalisation de la production française au Portugal dans une deuxième communication, on entend montrer ce soir que en fait le Made in France, et j'y réponds un peu déjà à mes questions, tire en fait sa richesse de ses racines internationales, puisant dans les savoir-faire étrangers et les structures industrielles européennes. La discussion aujourd'hui se finira avec une discussion avec Armine Ohanyan, qui elle est confrontée au Made in France tous les jours. Elle est designeuse, elle est créatrice de mode, elle a sa boutique à Paris et son challenge c'est de faire du Made in France malgré les obstacles.
Thank you. So very warm welcome also from me. My name is Renata Staus. I'm an assistant professor of fashion studies here at the American University of Paris, and together with Sophie Coudien we are organizing this research seminar on fashion cultures and histories, the second edition today, focusing on this question of Made in France and what's behind Made in France, as part of this year's edition of Deconstructing Paris Fashion towards a de-hierarchized narrative. So we will explore this notion of Made in France today through the questions of techniques and know-how. What is the fashion called? Parisian fashion, what is it made of? Who is it making? Who is it made by? Is it only the result of French know-how, the work of French workers? So through three different perspectives, through the case of Indian embroidery used by many Parisian luxury brands, and through the case of the relocation of French production to Portugal, this seminar intends to show that Made in France in fact draws its richness from its international roots, drawing on foreign know-how and European industrial structures. And the discussion will be based on also a specific example of the designer Armine Ohanyan, to try to understand really some of the challenges of making here in France. So we are thrilled that we are joined today by our three speakers, Nadia Albertini, Philip Rupp, and Armine Ohanyan. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And it's great to see you and be able to do this in person also again.
And juste pour vous rappeler avant que l'on commence, si vous voulez retrouver le programme du séminaire, plus d'informations sur nos speakers, n'oubliez pas, vous avez d'une part le site du séminaire sur le site du CNRS, vous avez cette page dédiée, et aussi le blog du séminaire. C'est juste des plateformes où vous pouvez juste avoir les informations sur ce qu'on fait, la prochaine séance, et aussi les plateformes où on va mettre les enregistrements des séminaires, parce qu'on enregistre les séminaires, et l'idée c'est de les rendre pérennes et les rendre accessibles sur Internet.
So before we come to the rich contributions of our three speakers who will take us on this journey to India, to Portugal, and back to the heart of France, Paris, in this exploration of Made in France, we want to spend a moment thinking about this notion, made in. What does it actually come far to? So the notion made in really can be traced back to England. In the year 1887, they passed a law that forced foreign companies to mark their products as made in Germany, for example, made in France. It was around that time that this label was established in several countries who wanted to sell their goods in England. Sophie will discuss the historical context and the specificity of Made in France in a moment. And I just want to briefly consider, in a way, the value association of Made in France. Seeing that we can finally be in one space again here together, we want to draw on on the collective intelligence we have, and really hear about your associations you have with this label. What does it conjure up? What associations you have, and we invite you to scan this QR code with your cameras, and you're then asked to type in 5 associations you have with the label Made in France. And we should be able to see in a minute live what everybody is putting in, so we get a collective idea of shared notions and differentiating notions.
So you have to work, sorry. It's not a cozy seminar. You have to work. So yes, you can see some of them.
And what happens is that all the words that are put in several times will appear larger, so we see a little bit what are the common associations, what are individual associations, yeah. So luxury seems to be the leading one.
And couture now. This is interesting. Quality. Quality luxury couture.
Yeah, so it's really, I mean, of course we're talking about fashion today, so couture is important, but quality and luxury, so high value associations are given to this label here. And it is precisely that which makes French fashion designers, and has made them for a long time, put this label, not just make them put their own label into their garments, but also the Made in France, also the Paris. So this connection between Made in France and Made in Paris and fashion is very important, which we'll hear more about later on. And the value really of Made in France is a very high one. And at the same time, it's largely unknown what is behind that. What does it mean to put Made in France in a garment, for example? Because really it's the 50% that need to be produced here, and every country also has slightly different legal requirements for that. So, for example, Made in Italy, until a few years ago, had the legislation that the last step in the production needed to be done in Italy, which could also mean that by sewing in the label Made in Italy, you could denote your garment as made in Italy. But that was changed, I think 13 years ago now, in 2009. But there's no standardized legal parameter that tells us what actually this made in means. And when we think about other labels like Made in China, for example, we might have different value connotations. So if you go back to your Menti, you can now see that you can also enter your connotations on Made in China, just to see what might be different associations that we have. Okay, already very different associations that might be expected, but it's almost the opposite of the associations we had with Made in France.
Cheap is the
So in connection with value, in connection with the laboring conditions. Maybe silk is a common connotation, but apart from that, they seem to be very different. Thank you very much for the participation here. And you know, what we see is really these different values. So when we think back to the creation of the Maiden in 1887, it was done to demarcate quality. It was done in a way to create value through disassociation. So this is a common strategy that we all engage in almost on a daily basis. We associate with certain material goods, certain brands, certain people, certain stories to create value. We disassociate from to also create value. And this is really at the core of this notion of Maiden. So when designers put the Maiden in France, of course it has to have a legal basis, but it is also to associate with a certain value. Much more realistic though, thinking of Paris fashion, and some of you might have visited this exhibition a few years ago, Fashion Makes Mode d'ici, créateur d'ailleurs, that mapped the fashion designers who were considered Parisian fashion designers or stood for Paris fashion, but really who came from all over the world. So when we look at the map, then really the label that should be in our garments in terms of designers, but really also in terms of production processes, should be this one. Because considering the full fashion chain, the full supply chain of a garment, it is very unlikely that, you know, the material, the textile production, the treatment, the actual garment manufacturing, design, etc. All these steps will take place in one place. So much more realistic is in our global epoch is this made in the world. But made in a singular country is still the standard and still the value we pertain to. And hand over to Sophie now to look at these roots of Made in France.
So just a few words about Made in France. L'idée c'est pas de vous faire un cours magistral sur Made in France parce que même moi je pense que je m'y perdrais, mais juste de revenir sur les racines historiques. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? On le voit tous les jours sur les magasins, dans les médias, mais qu'est-ce que ça veut dire ce Made in France? Et comme le disait Renato, en fait l'expression est loin d'être nouvelle, hein. Elle est étroitement liée au patriotisme économique qui naît en Angleterre à la fin du 19e siècle. Et on considère que c'est la loi du 23 août 1887, le Merchandise Mark Act, qui est voté en 1888, qui va obliger les fabricants français à faire apparaître sur leurs produits leur origine. Les Anglais prennent un peu peur de la mondialisation, des échanges de produits, et imposent aux Allemands, aux Français, de faire apparaître sur leurs produits, à partir de 1888, le fait que ça a été fait en France. Cette loi, elle est anglaise. 2 ans après, en 1890, on a une loi identique aux États-Unis, le Bill McKinley, qui impose la même idée. Vous devez, si vous vendez des produits français aux États-Unis, vous devez faire apparaître en anglais, sur ce vêtement, sur la nourriture, l'expression Made in France. Et je vous cite juste la règle: le nom du pays d'origine d'un objet manufacturé à l'étranger et importé aux États-Unis doit en principe être indiqué de la même manière que la marque de fabrique ou le nom du fabricant de cet objet. Donc en gros, au même niveau, on met le nom, Paul Poiret, et le fait que c'est Made in France. D'autres règles vont renforcer ces lois. Et ce qui est intéressant, moi j'ai utilisé la presse française pour comprendre quand le terme apparaît. Et dans la documentation que j'ai, je m'aperçois que la première occurrence du mot Made in France, elle apparaît en 1889, le 8 mai 1989, dans le journal Le Temps, qui est un fameux journal français. Et on voit dans cet article sur le ruban, et ça parle des rubans de Saint-Étienne, donc vraiment un savoir-faire français. C'est un article qui explique que dorénavant, les rubans français doivent faire apparaître le mot Made in France, vous le voyez ici dans l'article, fabriqué en France. Et il précise bien que ça doit être écrit en anglais pour que en Angleterre, aux États-Unis, on sache que ça a été fait en français. Donc ça, c'est la première occurrence du mot, donc vous voyez, vraiment il y a quelques années. Ensuite, pour vous donner une idée, et je vais vraiment aller brièvement là-dessus, sur le site Retro News, qui est un site allié à la Bibliothèque nationale de France, vous pouvez étudier la récurrence des mots, voir quand les mots sont apparus, quand ils sont importants ou pas. Et on le voit en fait que donc le mot, vous voyez le premier pic ici, donc le mot apparaît vraiment à la fin des années 1890, et j'ai fait des recherches, on le voit en effet de manière récurrente à partir de 1890, et à chaque fois, en fait, c'est pas seulement sur la mode, hein, c'est les produits en général, les produits, ça peut concerner les fournitures, la nourriture, la mode, et souvent, ce qui nous concerne, ça concerne les fabriques de Saint-Étienne, les rubans, tout ce qui est en fait French know-how, tout ce qui est français savoir-faire et tombe sous le coup de cette régulation. Mais déjà, et c'est ça que je trouve fascinant, c'est que déjà des personnes vont contourner cette loi. Et on voit notamment que certains vont faire apparaître Made in France, parce qu'ils le doivent, mais ils vont mentir sur le métrage du ruban. Et on voit déjà, dès 1890, des manufacturiers qui se plaignent des contrefaçons de rubans, non pas via l'étiquette, mais via le métrage. Donc on voit déjà que la contrefaçon existe depuis des années, des siècles, mais qu'en plus, le Made in France est déjà contourné à l'époque. Donc quelque chose qui est très contemporain aujourd'hui. Ensuite, ce que vous voyez, c'est que le premier pic de ce Made in France correspond à la Première Guerre mondiale. Et vous vous en doutez bien, il faut protéger la mode française, il faut protéger les couturiers français. Et donc c'est pour ça que si vous lisez la presse de cette époque, le Made in France est vraiment, vraiment prépondérant. Donc c'est le premier pic. Ensuite, le deuxième pic, c'est les années 29, 30, 31, quand bien sûr, avec la crise économique, on protège la production nationale. Et j'aime bien, j'ai trouvé cette image cette publicité dans Vogue français. Et vous voyez Rodier qui existe encore aujourd'hui et qui marque bien sur son étiquette que c'est Made in France. Enfin, le troisième pic concerne juste les périodes de fin années 30, début années 40, juste avant la Seconde Guerre mondiale, du fait des tensions internationales, de la préférence française. Et je vous ai pris juste deux exemples. Donc le chapeau Made in France, publié dans Marie-Claire, et la pub Elsa Schiaparelli, où vous pouvez lire en bas « Parfum, poudre, rouge à lèvres, Made in France ». Donc on voit que ça apparaît progressivement et de plus en plus dans la mode. Donc ça, c'est pour vous montrer que voilà, ça prend l'ampleur au début du XXe siècle, et n'en parlons pas, après la Seconde Guerre mondiale, dans les années 60, 70, 80, ça devient un argument politique, que ça soit du Parti communiste du côté de Georges Marchais, le Made in France dans les années 80 est un argument d'élection, et on a peut-être plus en tête Bayrou ou Arnaud Montebourg, pour ceux qui vivent en France, qui avec sa marinière était candidat à l'élection présidentielle. Pour terminer, qu'est-ce que le Made in France aujourd'hui ? On a les lois de 1880, c'est protéger, faire apparaître l'étiquette sur le vêtement. Aujourd'hui, c'est un peu différent, mais c'est en fait très très flou encore. Donc le Made in France ou fabriqué en France, c'est un marquage, toujours, mais ce n'est pas un label. C'est-à-dire que ça n'existe pas comme un label protégé. C'est plutôt les labels Origine France Garantie ou des labels régionaux qui sont utilisés, qui sont déposés comme labels. Et vous avez notamment deux labels importants, le label France Terre Textile, créé en 2008, et le label peut-être le plus important, qui est l'Origine France Garantie, créé en 2011. Et comme le disait Renate, l'idée c'est qu'il faut qu'au moins 50% du prix de revient unitaire soit acquis en France, et que le lieu où le produit prend ses caractéristiques soit aussi situé en France. Donc en gros c'est ça. Et je vais conclure là-dessus parce que c'est ça, mais qu'est-ce que ça veut dire 50%? Voilà. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire vraiment ce Made in France? On a beaucoup de documents comme ça aujourd'hui, des datas, des statistiques, mais finalement concrètement, et Nadia va en parler à travers le cas de la broderie, et Armine à travers elle sa pratique au quotidien. Au-delà des chiffres, comment on fait du Made in France, comment on y arrive, comment on arrive à faire en sorte qu'au moins 50% de la production soit faite en France. Juste quelques liens qu'on pourra vous envoyer si ça vous intéresse, des articles académiques, des articles de presse qui sont vraiment intéressants sur le sujet, qui sont aussi très contemporains, avec les liens avec le masque produit pendant le Covid, fait par des usines françaises. On voit la même chose pendant la Première Guerre mondiale, on voit des liens, des articles très intéressants, et aussi sur l'Inde et le Portugal, des sujets qu'on va évoquer ce soir. Donc je m'arrête là parce que sinon vous allez être très frustrés de entendre nos intervenants. Donc on est vraiment ravis de recevoir Nadia. Vous allez, c'est une vraie opportunité, une vraie chance de pouvoir de t'avoir. suis là, à nos côtés. Donc je vais te présenter brièvement et ensuite te laisser la parole. Donc Nadia est styliste et historienne, et c'est ça qui est fascinant, c'est qu'elle a cette double casquette de praticienne et de théoricienne. Elle est spécialisée dans la broderie main, c'est le sujet de son intervention ce soir. Elle collabore avec des maisons de mode parisiennes comme Chloé, Chanel et Balmain, et avec des créateurs internationaux tels que Dries Van Noten, Tory Burch et Zero. Et ce qui est, pour ceux qui sont très intéressés par la broderie, elle a très récemment publié un magnifique livre consacré au brodeur Rébé, qui est un magnifique livre, un bel objet, mais aussi le fruit de recherches inédites. Donc c'est un beau livre qui est sorti récemment, je vous le conseille. Et aujourd'hui, on a le plaisir de te recevoir pour parler des broderies indiennes dans la mode parisienne. Merci infiniment Nadia, je te laisse. Là, je vais pouvoir... Ah, voilà. Oui.
I'm gonna speak in English or French. What would you prefer? English. Okay. Well, thank you, Sophie and Renat, for having me here today. I'm very happy to be here. Does it sound okay? You sound good? Perfect. So before I start talking about different examples that I want to show you, I'm gonna explain. So my name is Nadia. I have been working for the fashion industry and specifically for embroidery for the past 15 years. I worked in France, but also overseas, in New York, in Belgium. And for me, embroidery is not only my job, it's really what I call my craft, a passion that I learned from my grandmother when I was 6. So I started really doing embroidery, hand embroidery myself when I was very young. And then it became my job, and I do it daily. Besides one of the two articles that you mentioned, I'm sure you've all have heard about Business of Fashion. There's a very interesting article about how this subject about Indian embroidery is sometimes kind of like touchy. It's tricky to talk about it because not all the brands that have their embroideries made in India are really vocal about it, and Business of Fashion, because there's really a question about it, treated the subject and really tried to question why this happens. So I really recommend that reading. And there's also a very good book called 21st Century Indian Embroidery for those who are interested. Okay, so now that I introduced that, I wanted to show you this. So this is one of the dresses from the Haute Couture 2008 Valentino show, which was his last show before he retired. And for me, this was the moment that I fell in love with Indian embroidery. I had done an internship at Chloe, my very first internship that had then turned into a job, where I had participated in designing embroideries and sending some of the development notes to India, but I was just an intern, so I hadn't really fully participated in the creative process. And when I saw this dress in the Valentino exhibition at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, I was reading all the little labels and where it was made. And I don't know if you can read it there, but it says embroidery Chamisa. And I had never heard about that name. I knew Le Sage, I knew Hurel, I knew Montex, all the Parisian embroiderers that I had always dreamt about working with. But Chamisa, never. So I started doing my research, and I found this lady who had created this Indian atelier in Bombay in the 70s. And she was air hostess back in the day, and she had the idea she knew embroidery made in India, because obviously embroidery is present on the everyday clothing. And she had this brilliant idea of getting little swatches made by some karigars. Karigars is the name that we give to craftsmen in India. And so she got a little collection made. And when she was traveling to Milan, to Italy, to Rome, she presented this little little suitcase of embroideries to Valentino himself. And that's how really Indian embroidery came to be and came to happen into the fashion world, the European fashion world. That was in the 70s. But before that jump, I want to take you, I want to kind of like make you understand what it implies to be an embroidery designer. So my role in fashion, for any of the fashion companies that I've worked with, is to be at the service of the head of design or the creative director. And I start by, we get a brief for the season. Let's say is basket weaving and Miami chairs, or like whatever brief you can get. So we start by doing research of inspiration. It can be images, it can be movies, it can be a tile, any painting you can see in a museum, a vintage piece, even clothing that are pieces of clothing, like personal archives that we have. And then we have to look for techniques more specifically, and that is when we call all our suppliers, embroiderers, all the manufacturers, and we kind of like gather a lot of techniques and sources of inspiration. Then we develop what we call the swatches. It can be little pieces of embroideries, and I have a box of those here for those who want to take a look later. So this process kind of comes back all the time for every single season. So we launched the swatch development, and I can apply the same sort of system to my embroiderers in Paris, in Italy, in Switzerland, India, China, Madagascar, Thailand. It's always kind of like the same process, probably different timelines, because it takes longer to get things from Thailand or India or Madagascar than it just to send a coursier to the 18th arrondissement. And then things come back, we approve them, or we improve them, or we cancel them, and then they get allocated to a garment. We need to make a placement on the patterns, and then we get the fully sample made to go on the runway. So we do this, sometimes we do 8 collections a year, so we have to do this 8 times a year, or we do just 2 or 4, but it's always kind of the same rhythm. So imagine that if you're working at Chanel and you have 8 to 9 collections every year, this process comes back every 4 to 5 weeks. So you have a very, very short time to get things done. You launch very quickly, so you have to be as precise and as clear about the things that you want to obtain, and I'll show you more precisely later. So now that we know this, we're talking about Indian embroidery today. So where does this come from historically? You need to know that so India, what we know as India today, was the Mughal Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries. So what I want to show you here is Persian embroidery came to India and stayed for good, and it was developed to a point that it became really a way of, like, it's an art form, and it comes from the word Sardozi, because when you go to India and you work with the karigars there, they're always repeating this word, and it comes from gold and dozi, so it's gold and embroidery, gold embroidery. We have turned this gold embroidery into something completely different, because today I can embroider with raffia, I can embroider plastic, and I can embroider sequins. I can use any type of material that you can imagine and possible. Plastic materials, pieces of discarded elements, anything you can find under the sun can be embroidered, especially if it's done by hand. And so today, how does that translate to today? The main hub for this very high and like very luxurious quality, because you were talking about the value that we perceive. Probably when I say made in India, you think saris, you think block print, you think kind of like very beautiful things, but not necessarily very high quality. And you'll see later, this is an embroidery that is not only impressively, it's the variety of techniques that we can have and we can use is really impressive, but also the number of carigers today in India. There is 1 million men capable of doing embroidery at that level. In Paris we count around 150 ladies capable of doing that sort of work. So it has happened to me that I have to do, okay, a 40 square meter fresque for a wall that implies 8,000 hours of embroidery, and I have to do it within a year. Even if I could, even if it was possible, I'm never gonna find the hand and the labor to do it in France. It's just not possible. I'll have to hire everyone working in Paris, and they have other jobs, they have other commitments. So I have no other choice but make it there. So today the main hub is Bombay. I have also done work in Delhi, but they're more specialized into like a little bit more machine embroidery, yardage, guipure. Calcutta is yet another thing. It's a mix of techniques. You can do machine. You can then weave the fabric there. You dye it. You get it machine embroidered, and then plus hand embroidery, and then you can actually finish the garments in Calcutta. I've done that with certain companies. And in Madras, I circle it because it's not necessarily an embroidery hub, but the Le Sage ateliers in India are located there. And I can say it because we're very vocal about it, and they are very proud about it, so I think we should mention it. Traditionally, Madras is obviously more about the weaving, but today we can consider that it's also important for embroidery. So let's dive into Bombay. I don't know if you know this, but Bombay is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, and I have the numbers here. Imagine that per square kilometers we have 20,500 people living in 1 square kilometer. Okay, so imagine the density. The second density after this is the Philippines. So here you see largely the whole of Bombay, and if you see the red square here, that is kind of the neighborhood. It's about 12 square kilometers, and where I'm pointing with the blue circle is the Bollywood area. Okay, that is where the Bollywood studios are located, and this is important because during the 70s and 80s, Bollywood had a boom of productions, and they needed embroidery for those productions. So that's why also Bombay was booming with embroidery craft, and that helped in a way to turn it into what it is today. So this is the zoom onto our little area there. Within this area that you can see here, there's probably 400 embroidery ateliers located in this area. Okay, and we can go from large ones that employ more than 400 carigers, to really small ones, like we can go then to medium, that's 100 carigers per atelier, smaller ones 50, and then very small ateliers, kind of like a family thing, where 10, 12 people will work, and it's always men. Women don't do embroidery in India at this level. It's a Persian tradition, and it's also only Muslim men. There's probably 98% of the carigers were Muslim, maybe 2-3% Christians, but it's very rare because this is a craft that is taught within the family. the father would teach his son, who would then teach the son. We're trying to change that. Today, I'm going to be working with a school for women to train them and to try to open this beautiful craft also to women. To dive more into the techniques. So we saw the sardozi is embroidery, but it also means the needle. Okay, you can see it on the right. On the left, you have what we call the ari hook, and for those who are familiar with French embroidery, we have le crochet de Lunéville. Okay, the ari hook became the crochet de Lunéville when with the export of Indian fabrics, the Armenians brought them to Marseille, and they brought within those lots of fabrics, they brought the ari hook, okay, in the 17th, 18th century. And that ari hook came up to Nancy and that area in the east of France, and they really didn't know how to use it. No one had given them like a tutorial or instruction sheets. And they thought, okay, this is quite practical, we can use it to create a chain stitch, but they started using it over like face down. In Lunéville embroidery, we don't see what we're doing. And I'll show you pictures and you'll see how in India, they use the ari hook, but the hook is on top of the fabric, and we do the kind of like the loop or the stitch underneath. And in France, I don't know, somehow something happened. We do it the other way around, okay? Because we didn't have really the method, I guess. So this is, I want to show you kind of like the sort of ateliers that I work with. So you see the massive embroidery frames. This is something that we did last year is for an artist. These are canvases of 2 meters by 3 meters. And usually we have similar things when we do very big gowns, important pieces for haute couture or ready-to-wear. We can go from this size of an embroidery to 5, 6, 7, 8 meters. We tend to roll and close down the frames, and we start doing the embroidery from the center. We can sit across from each other, kind of like a little bit scattered to cover more area, a larger area. And we work in front of each other. We have the materials on the frame, on the fabric. And see, I think you can see their hands. In their hand, they have the hook. So the hand that is under the fabric is doing the loop and the knot. And you just move along with the hook and you create that chain stitch. You can also apply beads, sequins, all types of materials that can be put onto the little hook, and you stitch them down by one. It's exactly the same method as a Lunéville hook, it's just the other way around. And I can tell you because I've done it, and I do both, and it's really, really hard to kind of like get your hand around, like your head around it to, okay, I'm switching sides. And now I want to give you more into detail 2 examples of the things that I have personally made in India. For this reason that I mentioned at the beginning, okay, everyone in fashion has worked with India at some point. A lot, not a lot, very little, sometimes, somehow. But very few brands are clear about it and are proud about saying it. There's 2 brands that I can very openly mention. Is Dior. They work with Chanakya School of Art in a very open way, and they say it and they're very proud about it. And Hermès, who does their embroideries with a Bombay-based atelier, and every time a scarf is embroidered, there's very few of them because they're sold even before they get to stores, to the shops. No one really can have access to that because they're so coveted that they're sold even before that. So Hermès puts a little label, made in India, or embroidery made in India. Obviously the silk is made in France, but part of part of the product has been made in India. So I'm not necessarily going to mention which brands are these, but you're probably going to guess, because I don't know how comfortable they are about me mentioning their work in India. Okay. So the first case. This is a ready-to-wear 2012 collection, and the inspiration was wicker chairs and basket weaving in a kind of like Miami vibe. Okay, we did a trip, we got inspiration, we put it all together, and these are the sort of images that I share with my embroiderers in Bombay, and I say, okay, what do you have? Get me raffia, get me yarn, get me cords, get me things. Gather a lot of materials in the market, in the local market. Sometimes I send them things from Italy, materials from France, and what you were saying earlier, Renate, is that when we think about it, maybe the base fabric was an Italian organza. The cords came from China. The raffia came from Madagascar. My design came from Paris. The inspiration came from Florida, and then the hand part was done in India. Then the panels came back and were mounted in the Parisian atelier. How can you quantify? How can you really actually count what is made where? Right? We need to be making and be paying a lot of attention about the hours, the labor, the shipments. These pieces travel more than us in a year within a 3 weeks period of time. So when I was saying that we have very little time to do things and everything is done in a rush, I said that we had to be very, very specific about what we want to obtain. So this is an example of the sort of notes that I put together. I get the idea. Let's say I start from this basket, okay? And I want to turn it into a square shaped thing. I draw this, I prepare all the notes, I send the materials, or I tell them, I actually reread my notes, this is from 10 years ago. And I was like, source this, take this, go to the market, because I've been there, I know these markets, I know exactly, I can tell them, go to this shop and get me this material from this guy, here's a card, call them. And so they do that. But I also try to open the possibilities. I say, okay, give me this is what I want, this is what I need. But they might have other ideas, they might have another interpretation of that basket weave that might be as good as mine, or sometimes, and most of the time, is even better. So I don't want to kind of like stop that creativity, so I ask them for one thing, and then I say, please play with the materials, with all the elements you have available, and give me your interpretation of this. This is what I obtained after those notes. In this case, I don't have the other images of the other things that they made, but of this specific demand. But this is what I usually get in a week's time of work, between 20 and 30 samples, A3 size, with a million ideas, a million different materials, and then we turn them into fashion pieces. So after we get all of this, I do an artwork that you have here on the bottom, and I tell them very specifically, I want this weave, that other weave, different scale, different technique. In here we have about maybe 10 to 15 different techniques, different sizes, different padding, because there's cords underneath that give volume and density. This is the right back of the dress. And so this is from 10 years ago, so the picture quality was not really good. Obviously today we could like FaceTime while they're working on the frame. 10 years ago we didn't have that. We didn't have Zoom, we didn't have like FaceTime. So we use pictures. And so they start working on the frame, they start really developing this. And I get step-by-step images, so I can correct, I can comment, I can say, yeah, this is the way, no, that's not the way, please correct, please change. And these are the panels that I get in Paris, probably 10 days later. It's very quick. It's very, very quick. There's probably 20 carriers working on this, 10 hours a day for six days a week. So I get this back and we turn it into a dress. It's all hand stitched in the atelier in Paris. And then it went into the catwalk piece that we saw here. So that was Resort 2012. Then comes this piece. So I made, I worked for the feather and flower atelier Le Marié for a few years in Paris. I really fell in love with flowers and feathers, and I love working with feathers even if I'm not an expert. It's a very pleasant sort of work. And so I developed this sample, and then we had to turn them into what I call a round-shaped dress. And if you pay attention, the feathers are kind of like going up, and they're positioned not in the normal way that would be kind of like covering like this, but they're upside down and up. And so in India, obviously, because I couldn't have made the dress myself, and they probably gave me, I think, I don't know, 7 to 8 days before the fashion show. I was like, okay, we're never going to be able to make it, not on my own. And so I worked with this atelier, sent them the feathers. They were cleaned and dyed in Spain, but they're original from South Africa. It came to Paris, it went to India, and I glue the feathers. In France, we glue the feathers onto the fabric. There, we can stitch it. This is kind of like the counter sample that they made for me to approve. I approve all this on picture, right? I never went there. I didn't have the possibility to traveling there at that time, so we did it all distance. This is it was 3 years ago, so we had FaceTime, we had Zoom. It was easier. And this is what's happening on the frame. They're applying the feathers exactly as I show them, with the density that I asked for. And these were kind of like orange slices shaped pattern pieces, because it had to be round, so they're narrower at the top, narrower at the bottom, but larger at the center. As you can see here. And so we made that dress that you see here on the right. So those are two very precise and very clear examples of the sort of things that we can do. And so I think that nowadays you can go on Vogue.com and take a look at all the fashion shows and all the pieces that you see on the catwalk. And probably 95% of what you see has been made in India. Of that 95%, probably 80% is done in Bombay, and in that area that I just mentioned and I'll talk you through. So, voilà. I hope that it was interesting and you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And at the end of the presentation, we can go through that little box and you can see a close-up and hold it in your hands of the sort of things that we do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nadia, for your talk. I will speak for myself, but it's really interesting to talk in details about this. So maybe we can keep the question for after, like that everyone can, you can, it's okay for you? Yeah, great. Armine, maybe, because I think that we are still waiting for Philippe, so maybe we can go with you with Armine. Merci beaucoup, Armine. Donc l'idée c'est de te poser des questions, plus d'échanger sur ton parcours et la réalité du Made in France. Parce que comme vous l'avez vu, et je pense que Nadia a fait une excellente transition, entre ce qu'on voit et ce qu'on sait, il y a un vrai fossé, il y a une vraie différence. Et j'imagine que pour un designer aujourd'hui, vais prendre un micro. Je pense que pour un designer aujourd'hui, vouloir faire du Made in France, et en faire, c'est quand même deux choses différentes.
Oui.
Non. Oh, pardon. Normalement, c'est bon. C'est bon. Ouais. Donc, entre vouloir en faire, il y a quand même un monde, et c'est pas aussi simple que la notion. Oui, donc est-ce que, Armine, est-ce que tu pourrais, je pourrais te présenter, je pourrais expliquer, mais est-ce que tu pourrais peut-être toi le faire et nous dire, avant d'arriver au Made in France, qui es-tu, comment tu as fait pour créer ta marque? Je pense que ça peut intéresser aussi beaucoup de personnes. Donc est-ce que tu peux commencer par nous expliquer ça?
D'abord, bonjour, je suis ravie d'être là. Je remercie Sophie pour l'invitation. Et oui, je suis Armine Ohanyan, je suis créatrice de mode, la fondatrice de la maison Armine Ohanyan Paris, qui est une maison de techno-couture qui fusionne les nouvelles technologies et l'artisanat. Donc je l'ai fondée en 2017. Mon parcours, c'est quand même un peu plus artistique que mode. J'ai fait les beaux-arts à Yerevan parce que je suis arménienne, je viens d'Arménie. Et ensuite les beaux-arts de Lyon, en design textile. Et ensuite j'ai complété mes études dans une école de mode à Paris. Et suite à ça, j'ai gagné 2 concours de mode, 3 après, mais 2 concours de mode qui étaient liés aux nouvelles technologies. Et voilà, juste après mon cursus, j'ai fondé la maison avec Thibault Le Portois, qui est aussi le cofondateur de la marque. Donc, qu'est-ce que c'est la technocouture? Peut-être je vais un peu parler de ça. C'est en fait c'est la fusion entre les nouvelles technologies et l'artisanat. C'est quelque chose qu'on n'imagine pas vraiment que c'est possible. Mais en fait, quand je suis arrivée en France, il y a 8 ans, j'ai vu qu'il y a un savoir-faire incroyable, une richesse liée à l'artisanat. Et j'ai tout de suite voulu travailler avec des artisans. Donc les artisans comme un maître plisseur, les brodeurs, des plumassiers ou un bottier, etc. Donc à Paris on peut trouver des artisans de luxe incroyables et c'est comme ça que je m'intéressais aussi aux nouvelles technologies et je me suis dit peut-être je peux fusionner les deux et vraiment présenter ma vision de la mode, qui est quelque chose de nouveau, mais c'est comme ça que je vois la mode. Il y a 2 ans, on a ouvert, 2 ans et demi, on a ouvert la boutique dans le Marais. Pourquoi c'était important? Parce qu'on fait beaucoup du demi-mesure, on fait les éditions limitées, on fait les collections en précommande et c'était important quand même d'avoir un lieu, un atelier boutique où je peux recevoir aussi mes clientes et toutes nos collections on fait ici en France, à Paris même, parce qu'on travaille beaucoup avec des artisans et avec des différents ateliers. Là, en fait, je voulais un peu présenter une collection capsule qu'on a fait avec un artiste japonais qui est installé aussi à Paris et avec qui on a créé en fait cette collection capsule dans le thème un peu l'art portable. Et donc, vous pouvez voir comment on a travaillé cette collection. Donc j'ai laissé libre l'artiste de s'exprimer et les pièces étaient déjà montées. C'était vraiment l'inconnu, on ne savait pas qu'est-ce que ça va donner à la fin. Donc je l'ai laissé vraiment de s'exprimer en fonction de son inspiration. Et donc on a créé cette collection capsule qui lie 2 créateurs, 2 artistes. Vous allez voir à la fin ce que ça a donné. Et là, oui, c'est la robe qui est un tulle invisible sur lequel on a fait aussi la peinture. On travaille beaucoup à la main quand même dans notre atelier. On avait co-créé une jupe avec Sophie Fontanelle, qui est une personne très connue dans la mode. Et suite à... C'était une jupe en fait à la base qui devait être un satin duchesse de soie, une matière très noble. Et pendant l'essayage, elle a essayé un toile de patron. C'est une matière avec laquelle on fait les vêtements pour essayer, pour voir si tout va bien, si ça tombe bien, etc. Et quand elle a vu la pièce un peu à la patronne, elle a dit que c'est ça qu'elle aimait, parce qu'elle est écrivaine aussi. Et ce côté un peu brut, naïf, ce côté-là, elle a beaucoup aimé. Donc on a ensuite travaillé en bâti cette jupe. Et à partir de cette pièce, j'ai fait une petite collection capsule qui est tout travaillé à la main avec cette technique de bâti. Et là, en fait, ça montre vraiment cette utilisation de nouvelles technologies dans mes créations. Ce qui est un peu peut-être rare à voir, c'est que la découpe laser, on a fait sur le denim, qui est une matière quand même qu'on porte presque tous les jours, assez démocratisée, pardon. Et j'ai voulu faire une collection capsule quand même portable, mais qui montre vraiment qu'on peut quand même utiliser les nouvelles technologies, faire des pièces portables. Et vraiment fusionner les deux. Et on a fait dernièrement, il a en fait une collection NFT qui sort, qui est entièrement fait en 3D à partir de cette pièce, de cette capsule qu'on a fait. Vous pouvez voir le résultat de l'NFT qui sort, qui n'est pas encore sorti. Et je disais que je travaille beaucoup avec des artisans. Là, c'est une pièce un peu sculpturale qu'on a fait pour un shooting, pour une création unique. Et là, c'est le travail vraiment du plissé sur des différentes matières. Ça peut être de satin organza ou même du PVC, l'organza simple. Et lorsque j'ai vu en fait le maître plisseur, je suis allée à son atelier. Donc il a un atelier à Paris. Ça m'a beaucoup inspirée et c'est comme ça que j'ai voulu aussi travailler. En fait, c'est quelque chose qui est assez intéressant parce que c'est comme un dialogue, c'est quelque chose, en voyant des pièces, par exemple, ce que tu disais pour la broderie, ça peut me donner, par exemple, les différentes techniques que je peux voir, ça peut me donner aussi des idées pour la création. Et là, quand j'ai vu ces plissés, c'est ça qui m'a beaucoup inspirée et que j'utilise assez régulièrement dans mes créations, dans mes collections. Donc le Made in France, je dirais, c'est aussi et là c'est ce côté luxueux qu'on peut vraiment donner la qualité, l'excellence, mais il a aussi d'autres aspects, je pense, qui sont intéressants dans Made in France, de fabriquer en France. Et là, c'est ce côté, la proximité. Les ateliers de proximité, par exemple, si je veux faire des pièces en broderie, si je veux faire des pièces en plissé, etc., je sais que ça peut être déjà assez rapide. Je peux voir mon artisan, on peut discuter, on peut voir les techniques qu'on peut trouver ensemble pour telle et telle création, mais c'est aussi un engagement, je pense, c'est un engagement. On sait que la mode, ça pollue énormément. C'est le deuxième secteur qui pollue le plus quand même notre planète. Et pour moi, c'était important de faire quelque chose qui a du sens. Et faire du Made in France, je trouve qu'aujourd'hui, ça a beaucoup de sens. C'est par exemple pour faire une collection qui est faite en Chine, après l'imprimé est fait en Italie, ensuite je ne sais pas, les dernières finitions sont faites dans d'autres pays, après ça vient en France. C'est quand même c'est quelque chose qui pollue énormément. Et je trouvais que déjà on a beaucoup de richesses en France, un savoir-faire exceptionnel, et ça serait dommage d'aller voir ailleurs, de faire ailleurs. Mais je dirais le seul inconvénient de faire en France, c'est quand même le coût qui est vraiment énorme. Et pour faire quelques pièces, ça peut coûter beaucoup plus cher que faire dans d'autres pays, même une collection entière, une production, etc. Mais étant donné que ma marque, c'est quand même une marque très, très haut de gamme, certaines pièces couture, pour moi c'était important quand même de travailler ici, et c'est un engagement pour moi, pour ma marque, de faire tout en France.
Et tu as toujours voulu faire du Made in France, c'était ton objectif dès le début, c'était local, travailler avec des artisans, c'était la première chose que tu as voulu faire?
Quand je suis arrivée en France, oui, je pense que c'est là que j'ai vu qu'il y a quand même quelque chose un savoir-faire lié à l'artisanat qui est assez exceptionnel. Et c'est là que, en voyant en fait, j'ai pu rencontrer plusieurs artisans, et c'est là que ça m'a donné des idées pour plutôt me focaliser en France, à Paris, et faire tout en France.
Et tu disais, c'est pas facile. Est-ce que tu peux revenir un peu là-dessus? Parce que c'est vrai que c'est très noble, c'est un engagement, mais tu veux pas nous expliquer tous les obstacles, mais qu'est-ce qui est le coût? Mais comment tu fais en fait pour produire quand même, malgré les obstacles?
Ce qui est au début, quand j'ai créé ma marque, c'est vrai que la marque, déjà dans le milieu de la mode, personne connaissait, donc il fallait déjà entrer dans ce milieu qui est un milieu très, très fermé quand même. La mode, c'est un milieu extrêmement fermé, surtout à Paris. Les difficultés, c'est surtout travailler avec des artisans qui acceptent de travailler avec toi déjà. Premièrement parce que parfois ils ne te connaissent pas et ils ne savent pas si tu es capable de payer, ou tout simplement parce qu'ils ont beaucoup de travail. Ils sont très sollicités par des maisons de couture, et eux ils travaillent essentiellement avec les maisons de haute couture. Et tu passes un peu, quand tu crées ta marque, tu es une marque, tu es quand même un créateur émergent, et tu passes un peu derrière de tous ces gens-là. Est-ce qu'ils disent parfois peut-être oui, on n'a pas beaucoup de temps, là on doit travailler pour Dior, on doit travailler pour Givenchy, etc. Et là on n'aura pas beaucoup de temps pour développer pour vous. Ou d'autres qui veulent même pas vous recevoir aussi, qui veulent pas travailler, ça les intéresse pas travailler avec des marques pas encore connues. Les difficultés, ça peut être ça. Par exemple, je voulais développer aussi la maille, parce que 90% de mes collections c'est plutôt chez Netram, et je voulais développer la maille, et je voulais surtout faire en France. Et là aussi, j'ai vu que les fabricants ne veulent pas travailler avec des gens créateurs. Je pense pas que c'est vraiment, ils ne veulent pas, mais il a aussi ce côté, parfois ils ne trouvent même pas des personnes pour compléter leurs équipes. Et parfois ils n'ont pas beaucoup de temps pour travailler.
C'est cette question de la formation, il faut former les artisans de demain.
Bien sûr, ouais.
Et une question que je vais te poser, c'est est-ce que tu es contrôlé? Parce que tu fais du Made in France, toi tu es contrôlé? Est-ce qu'on vérifie que 50% de ta production au moins est faite ici?
Nous personnellement, on n'était jamais contrôlés, mais parce que peut-être on ne fait pas beaucoup d'exportation, etc. Ça doit être lié à ça. Mais pour le moment, non, ce n'est pas vraiment lié au contrôle.
D'accord. Et est-ce que tu fais des petites séries? Tu vends à peu près quand tu fais une nouvelle collection, ou la jupe dont tu as parlé, combien à peu près tu produis et tu vends?
C'est vraiment très varié. C'est par exemple la collection capsule qu'on a sortie avec l'artiste japonais. On a fait vraiment une édition limitée, donc il avait seulement 50 pièces de chaque pièce, il avait une cinquantaine de pièces. Mais on ne pensait pas qu'on va pouvoir tout vendre, mais c'était vraiment un grand succès, donc on a zéro stock sur ça. La jupe Sophie, c'est pareil, c'est toujours en précommande. C'est vrai que je n'ai pas vraiment calculé le nombre de pièces, mais avec Sophie Fontanelle, c'était assez incroyable.
Oui, parce c'est ça aussi
la notoriété.
Est-ce que tu sens que les journalistes aident un peu la cause du Made in France? Est-ce que c'est ceux hypocrites ou est-ce qu'ils sont vraiment intéressés par des designers qui font du Made in France?
Je pense que ça dépend de qui, mais ceux qui ont une éthique, qui ont cet engagement, ils font en sorte que ça soit plus parlé dans le média. Je reçois souvent, par exemple, j'étais invitée au salon Première Vision Made in France. J'étais la créatrice qui était invitée pour habiller aussi les hôtesses d'accueil, mais aussi pour mettre en avant mon travail, mon engagement pour Made in France. Mais je pense que ce n'est pas assez. Je pense qu'on n'est pas assez soutenu de ce côté-là. Ouais.
C'était ma prochaine question. Est-ce que tu te sens soutenu par la ville, la région, l'État? Pas du tout.
Non,
les fédérations
absolument pas. Non, absolument pas. Et surtout parce que je suis souvent en lien avec la fédération. J'ai postulé aussi pour entrer dans la calendrier, etc. Et à chaque fois, je dis que c'est quand même, on fait quand même en France. Ce n'est pas juste, c'est vraiment un engagement de notre part de faire en France et de ne pas aller ailleurs pour faire tous nos produits. Mais parfois, ils répondent. Ce n'est pas très important pour nous. Et je trouve ça incroyable.
Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que la semaine dernière, on a reçu Pascal Morand de la Fédération, on a parlé avec les étudiants de ça. Et c'est vrai que dans le discours, je sais pas où Renata, oui, c'était quelque chose qui apparaissait beaucoup, le Made in France. Donc c'est toujours la théorie et la pratique. Il y a un décalage incroyable entre ça.
Oui, je trouve que on n'est pas assez. Moi, de mon côté, peut-être il y a d'autres créateurs qui peuvent dire le contraire, mais de mon côté, je trouve qu'on n'est pas encore assez soutenu. Pour ça, on n'est pas. Par exemple, même ils disent, par exemple, la Fashion Week de Paris, c'est quand même assez international et viser sur du Made in France, il n'y a pas beaucoup d'importance pour eux. Et je trouve. Ça, c'est une phrase qui m'a un peu choquée quand même, de ce côté-là. Oui, parce que c'est.
Parce que comme tu le disais, c'est pas seulement une question de label, c'est une question d'écologie,
absolument,
d'éthique, de respect.
Oui, et aussi de créer de l'emploi, de permettre à ces artisans d'exister encore, parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'ateliers qui vont fermer, je crois. Ils vont pas pouvoir... parce que c'est lié avec beaucoup de charges, etc. Et pendant la pandémie même, je travaille avec un maître plisseur qui disait que pendant la pandémie, lui, il n'était pas du tout soutenu et il ne savait même pas s'il va tenir quand même cette année pour pouvoir encore exercer son métier qui est assez incroyable.
Et ce qui est étonnant, c'est que lorsque vous allez sur le site du ministère de l'Industrie, vous avez des pages et des pages sur le Made in France, vous avez des associations d'associations. Voilà, le Made in France, c'est trendy, c'est le New Black. Et après, il y a ce discours qui montre en fait que, bon, c'est un discours, mais il n'y a pas vraiment d'effet, en tout cas pas en
Non, il n'y a pas vraiment d'effet, oui, je trouve. Ouais. Je pense que peut-être que ça va venir parce qu'avec la pandémie, il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont changé et bougé, et peut-être... c'est le temps de se localiser en fait, de faire la production, de faire en sorte qu'il y ait plus d'ateliers, plus de personnes formées, parce que ce que nous manque aujourd'hui, c'est aussi les jeunes qui ne se forment pas et qui ne veulent pas faire ce métier. Et peut-être il faut valoriser ces métiers, surtout, il faut les valoriser.
Oui, totalement. On parle dans les médias et par le salaire aussi.
Par le salaire,
totalement.
par les médias, dans tout.
Peut-être qu'on peut arrêter là et réserver les questions après, parce que moi j'ai posé, mais je pense que les étudiants et les participants auront de meilleures questions. Mais merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Je trouve que c'est une belle plongée dans le concret.
Thank you so much for this fascinating insight and also this reality check in a way, what it means to be producing in France today. So now it is my great pleasure, et voilà, to introduce Philip Rook, who's literally just flown in.
Yes, sorry I'm late, I'm traffic jam everywhere.
From Germany. He's a professor of fashion design at the University of Applied Sciences in Bielefeld, Germany. He studied fashion and design at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, and then worked for several international brands. He worked also in New York for several years and has been living in Berlin since 2007, working as a fashion designer and also teaching at the Berlin University of the Arts and at Bielefeld. And he's conducting a lot of research into processes of fashion about which he's going to speak now. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. Thanks a lot. And sorry for me being so late.
No, it's really not guilty at all.
Crazy out there. So, good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about my current research project on fashion production in Portugal. The question here tonight is what is made in France, and one answer could be Portugal. I started this research because I'm very interested in the material reality of fashion. Also to show my students how clothing is actually made, because there's so much social and emotional. Oh, thanks, Nancy.
I'm so small, it's my fault because I'm so small. So.
No problem.
Is that good?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you. My students are dealing a lot with the social and emotional meanings of clothing and fashion, so that we often forget how they're really made. What is the reality behind it, you know? And we forget to ask the questions: where and how is fashion actually produced, and who makes the garments that we wear, and what processes are involved in the production of clothing and fashion. So I traveled to Portugal in November 2021. I was invited by a Porto-based agency that functions as a bridge between brands from outside and Portuguese manufacturers. I will talk about this later a bit more. And they produce they oversee the design development for mostly European brands, mostly French. And with their team I visited several factories where they work with. And then again in December 2021 I was invited by the Portuguese Clothing Manufacturers Association, Moda Portugal, to go on an industry tour with other fashion educators and their students. During this trip I visited a couple of companies that produce for the French luxury market, and I went to on a design development meeting with a brand that actually it's a big company that produces for brands from France and Belgium, with a strong emphasis on streetwear. which is also a majority of the garments that are being produced in Portugal are jersey and knits. So we talk about entry products. You know, it's like the t-shirts, sweatshirts, and hoodies that became so popular with the rise of streetwear as a global phenomena, and that this is the everyday clothes that everybody wears, but also it's became a very, very big, important part of the turnover of French luxury groups. And I'm not allowed to name names, of course, but I can tell you that almost every French brand, whether they're independent or like a micro brand, or if they're part of a luxury group, or if they are even a private luxury group, they produce in Portugal. So yes, you see a lot of like sweatshirts and hoodies in the making. That is what is being mostly produced in Portugal. Of course, they also do woven production, but this is the base. Of course, one of the reasons why French brands produce in Portugal is economic. 90% of the people employed in the Portuguese garment sector earn the national minimum wage, which is at this moment 705 euros. This is should be noted that right now Portugal is in a very difficult economic situation. Like around 80% of the people employed in Portugal earn the minimum wage. And it is for the people working in the garment industry, it's possible to survive on this wage because the family structures in Portugal are still very traditional. People support each other a lot, because otherwise you can't really survive on this wage, because the living costs in Portugal are not much lower than they are in Germany or France, you know. So it's quite just to give you an idea how that is. Over the last 30 years, around about 30 years, French high fashion and luxury brands have closed a lot of production in France and reorganized their supply chain, often relocating their production to countries with much lower wages, such as Portugal, and with little or no social security contributions. And that I found that very striking when on my tours, that it's these images that we perceive that are produced through marketing and everything it's so different to what it has so little in common with the life realities of the people living from the garment production. For instance, like a 700 euro t-shirt from a luxury brand, the wage costs are about 10 to 15 euros. That's part of these 700 euros. Another big reason for French brands why they produce in Portugal is because of the exceptional the quality of the production there. Like quality control is implied in all steps of the production, from knitting to the finishing of the garment. For instance, this lady is checking the shrinkage from t-shirts after like test washes. So it's a very high quality standard of production in Portugal, and a lot of the people I talked to, they actually moved away from made in Italy, which is like apparently the most prestigious high fashion production country. When you think it resonates a lot, but there has been so much subcontracting in the production in Italy that people were repelled and moved their production to Portugal instead. Around 70% of the production is done in the north of the country, in the Braga, Barcelos, Porto region, which is also very practical because there's a big port in Porto, so it's very fast for to do logistics from the Porto harbor to all the end clients in France, Great Britain, and Germany, but this is like the most important partners is France and Great Britain. The interesting thing is that although the sample production is made in this area. All the companies, or most of the companies I visited, have further facilities in Northern Africa. So we don't really know if the order production is really made in Portugal or in North Africa. It's a little bit like complicated, of course, to talk about that with my interview partners. They were all people from the company side. I was a little bit aware, possible to talk with union persons or stuff like that, but it's difficult. And more than 5,000 companies in that area employ about 200,000 workers, and most workers in the garment industry in Portugal are women with few years of education, and they are relatively older compared to other garment producing countries, which is a problem that all the garment manufacturers are very aware of, that in around 10 years time they will really have problem finding people that really produce their orders. It's similar to what you were talking about earlier, that young people don't want to do these jobs anymore. There are several ideas to change that, but nothing is yet. It's a problem that is really urgent, but nobody has a solution yet. And one easy solution would be to bring in immigrant workers. You know, it's like everywhere else, but it's being discussed. If the country really want, if they really want to do that. The number of unionized workers is also very low, because the companies, the factories are pretty small. Like 90% of the garment producing factories have fewer than 50 employees, although there's a lot of subcontracting. But the people are that is not really part of the monitoring of the brands. So we are often unaware of their existence. You know, I will now quickly go through the production process with you. And I'm just going to put this.
Can you speak a little closer to the
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
Because
Is that
it's
better?
recording.
Oh, okay, cool. So in France, where everywhere else in Europe, the end customer is very aware of sustainable matters. This is a very high, how do you call it? Like it's a very big thing in Portugal. The Portuguese manufacturers early on recognized that this need for sustainable fashion will grow, and they invested heavily in production plants, implanting new standards of recycling, upcycling, and also, like we will see later, dyes, like plant dyes and enzyme dyes. It's a big topic, and on the industry tour with Moda Portugal we were taken to Valerios 360, which is like a plant in the Braga region that focuses on recycling textile waste from their own production. They have like a conventional production, and they collect the waste from that, the cutting waste. They collect the production waste from other companies, and they recycle it to new yarns. Like it's shredded, it's put in solutions to make it softer, to get the fibers smaller. They are very small though. They have to mix it with organic cotton, so it's not super. You know, you can't just use the shredded fabrics. You have to always bring in like a natural fiber, like organic cotton, for instance, which is mixed in here. And out of this wedding-like recycled fibers, they twist new yarns. This big and these tubes of big like material are then being spun into very fine yarns. Jersey in all those factories. There's a lot of investment in high-tech machinery, so there's less and less people also working there, which is another problem that the industry is facing. These recycled yarns can then be transported to the next step, which is mostly knitting, like I said. Portugal is very high percentage of the goods produced there are knitting and for jersey production. You can see also how complex these machines are. They're actually very beautiful, like how high tech and well set up everything is. It takes up to 3 days if you have like a brocade, like a special pattern that you want to knit, to set up the machine. But then it keeps on running for a couple of days also, And this is like people like him that is setting up these jacquards, and also interesting here that you in all the factories you have machinery that is really already 40-50 years old, running next to super high-tech, latest state-of-the-art machinery. So they are constantly updating also to meet the demands. Like when I was visiting Portugal in November and December 2021, there was a lot of extra production coming in from Asia, because all the factories were closed by then. The supply chains were completely broken, so they took in all the orders they could get, but they couldn't handle everything because they didn't have enough people to sew all the garments together in the end. But they also, all the people I talked to, they knew this is going to be like a temporary problem. They were hoping because fast fashion will always move back to Asia, and Portuguese manufacturers, they really want to focus on mid to luxury segment of fashion production. Then also interesting entry product is socks. Also with streetwear, we rather invest in a sock of a fancy luxury brand that is maybe also embroidered with it. They also knit circle knits, basically.
Não, era só para mostrar. Agora como é que sai? Podes pegar. Posso pegar? Pronto, a cor começa a aparecer aqui. The color.
Coming. Also to check the quality of the dyes. This is done. And then they're really, which I found very interesting to see. They are heat fixed in shape. Like the sock comes out like a tube. And then they're put in on a heat fixed like over 100 degrees to get them the shape that we know. And of course embroidery, logos are very important, So it's very interesting. I think they produce what did it say, 30,000 socks a day. This company alone. And again here it's a very high. It's a very important product that we often don't think about when we think about high fashion. Weaving, there's not only knits, but also, of course, woven fabrics being produced in Portugal. This company I visited here, they also just had in a huge order from Zara, which Zara couldn't finish in Asia, so they took in the order. And they do both. They weave with already colored yarns, or they weave plain fabric which is later garment dyed. Which is here. You see this is the facility. They can manage up to 40,000 meters of fabric a day. It's interesting to note also that before the 2010s, Portugal was mostly producing for Inditex and other Spanish like fast fashion companies because of the proximity, obviously, and because it had just come out of the dictatorship. There was a long period, like on the 25th of April 1974, there was a revolution in Portugal, and after that they opened up, and then first people that came in were like Zara, Inditex group to produce there, and little by little they have evolved and really want to focus on these niche fashion-driven smaller brands or a luxury market. And it's always interesting to see the interplay of human labor and this machinery. This is something very moving that you see in all the facilities. Another really interesting aspect when it comes to design is the handling of these orders. There are two ways how the Portuguese fashion manufacturers do business with brands from France. Like they are working through an agency. This is like method number one that I mentioned. The agency that invited me to go on the tour with them. They function as a bridge between producer and brand. They do not only follow up the production and the development of the garments as indicated by the brands, but they also provide logistics service and design. So something might be half finished from the design team in Paris, and then they handle it over to the agency and they develop it further. Usually they follow up the introductions as indicated by the brands, but more and more this is also due to the speed of fashion. They have these companies grow their own design departments, so they become bigger and bigger. What also is becoming bigger and bigger is the in-house design departments in Portuguese companies. They have designers for each brand that they work with, so each designer in the Portuguese company has one brand that they exclusively work with. They show the clients fabrics from the fabric libraries, everything that's possible. Then things are slightly altered. And artworks. There's a whole little industry all around those manufacturing companies producing artworks for French companies, the design team then go and see what they produce, and then show it to the brands, so they can decide what they want to. What you want to imply, what you want to change a little bit. It's all basically like it's called the curatorial design, which is something that is becoming bigger and bigger. Like all the Portuguese, like the bigger companies, they have their own range that they produce, because it's always like they have their own fabric company and they have a production company. So they want to show the brand what they can do with the fabric that they can offer, how the fabric might look after washing, how it might look after dyeing, what garments you could make out of them. And they're very trend aware, they're very fast fashion forward. They realize this really early, that they have to really deliver trends before the brand maybe even comes to them, so they're ready to go. You know, when the brand comes and say they like decide on the color scheme, a lot of things are not that much altered. So the curatorial design means that a lot of the design work doesn't really happen in, let's say, Paris, but a lot with the production in the manufacturer in Portugal. So it's choosing things that they have and putting them together. So I found that very interesting how big that actually became. The first ones that started this were denim producers in the 2000s, because the clients they couldn't imagine how the denim would look after you would make a garment out of it or after you washed it, and so they started this trend, and this became more and more common in the whole industry. And also because of the lack of training with students, this is what one interview partner also told me, that design students are there's not so much time to go deeper into the material of fabric, you know. So at least in my school or in Germany in general, it's a big problem because there's also no fabric production in the country. Another company that is very looked after in the fashion world right now is this company that I visited in November. It's located in the north of Portugal. It's a dye house, like a dyeing company. They show at Première Vision. Their stand is one of the most sought after. They're very innovative when it comes to natural dyes, developing new colors out of natural dye stuff. And they're also starting to imply enzyme dye, which is like the latest thing, like development in dyeing, that you don't even need water anymore. You grow the pigments into the fabric. This is something they're very fast with implying these, and very innovative organic dye processes and fabric treatments. Also, that's also what they do. They develop also again an in-house design teams and their production engineers. They develop new fabrics together with like I said, engineers, following trends that they see on WGs and Pantone, etc. This machine is very interesting. I was super fascinating. They basically a brand decides on the color scheme, and then they send whatever color reference they have, be it a piece of vintage fabric. They could even read, this machine can even read nail polish or a leaf or whatever, and they put it in there, and the machine creates a color formula, which is then being mixed up for a sample dye by this machine.
So it mixes it up with all the different components.
Yes, and you put the formula in the river. Know exactly what amount of dye and this reflector will be formed.
Yeah, so this is then mixed for a sample dye, and once the brand agrees on the color, the fabric is also dyed in-house there. They work directly with most of their clients. And in these big vats, depending on the fabric, the dyes need up to 6 to 30 hours, which is of course very water consuming and very energy consuming. These are the people operating these machines, and they are working on a sewage treatment plant, which they have on site, because there's no general sewage treatment in this region of Portugal. So they filter all the ingredients out until the water has the pH degree of the river that it goes into. At least that's what they told me. Cutting then the fabric is when it's dyed and treated, it's been cut.
Woche in two shifts. This fabric warehouse is you see over there. This is only the fabric we need for this week. So every week they change it because we don't have space to keep all the fabric here.
Wow. And same here, some vacuum tables, and then they start.
Wie viele Schichten sind das denn? Ach so.
And then they're being cut mechanically as well. And then each stack of cut leather pieces are labeled by clients and then put together in this.
That's my clients.
Wow. basically I go to the, yes, like I said, they're being put together in bundles, together with washing instructions, labels, buttons, etc. And then they go to the sewing studios. And I found it quite interesting that sewing is still the most anachronistic part of how garments are being made. In this whole production chain, there's so much high-end mechanical machinery being implied, but sewing is still done in a very anachronistic way. It's quite button machine. So I gave you a short impression on the production processes and the people involved. What I find, just to recap or to think about again, is that these factories are producing for sample collections, mostly for French and international brands from the mid to luxury segment. Still, the workers that work there earn the minimum wage, working 8 hours a day, 40 hours per week. But since the crisis of 2008, the Portuguese labor code has been revised in order to enable enterprises to be more adaptable to the needs of the changed economic panoramas. So, in peak production periods, the daily limit may extend to 12 hours a day and 60 hours per week, or even further, because it's quite complicated. They have to then deduct time later on in the production. So this was the case when I was there, because of this extreme demand in production because of the closing of Asia at the time. And yeah, that was my short impression. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to you for this impression of Portugal, of Made in France in Portugal, and really all three of you for giving faces also to the people behind Made in France, essentially, giving us so many great insights and stories, and talking about these processes that are really very opaque and that are kept opaque on purpose. So we have time for some questions. We also have some wine, and maybe we can combine the two. So if maybe all the speakers, if you want to come here, and it would be great if you could use a microphone because they're connected to the recording. Are there any questions?
Yes. Maybe people can hear my voice like this.
Hello, my name is Sabine Ishikawa. I have a question to Philip. What was the purpose of your research when you went to Portugal?
My main interest was to show my students how garments are made, because we in fashion education we focus on the concept, and on the fantasy, and I think it's for them to see how an idea becomes a finished product. I think that's very important to see, and also to get a little bit more appreciation maybe for the qualifications of people who make their garments. I think that because we don't have much in Germany, there's hardly any.
So in Germany, your students cannot go and visit this kind of factory? There's no place to see?
No, almost nothing. No, not on this level. Because of since the 1980s, everything has been offshored, and there are little things that are there. But I talked to a lot of people or actors in the Berlin fashion scene and small brands in Germany. That's how I started my research. I talked to them. Where do you actually produce? And they most of them produce in Portugal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I also have a question for Philippe. You mentioned in the beginning that there's a lot of investment, obviously, in all of the machinery. And I was just curious, and forgive me if you said this, but is it the brands that are mostly putting money into like having this machinery in their factories in Portugal? Do they give access to other brands or companies that want to use it? Because it's very high tech and I imagine it's very, very expensive.
Yes, so thank you. No, I think I mentioned a little bit. It's from the manufacturers, the owners of the factories. They imply those machinery. What's also really interesting in the whole garment production process, most of the brands, they don't own factories at all. You know, that used to be the case up until the 1980s. But that's why also they can't be really if something happens. It's the producers, you know, the risk is on the producer side, but it's them who actually buy the machinery, and yeah. So it's from the manufacturer, but then they produce really amazing pieces, and then another brand comes in, you know. So for them it's a good investment for the Portuguese manufacturers.
Right.
Yeah, but it's owned by them. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I imagine the brands have to pay to use these machines. And then certain designers probably couldn't
deal,
access, depending, because it's, I mean, it's super fascinating, but it's like you said, like the enzyme dyeing, like that's very niche, and I know it's not applied all around yet. So I'm just kind of curious, about like the accessibility and how everyone does that. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a question which I think is probably for all three of you, but maybe starting with Nadia, are you frustrated sometimes by not being mentioned as a designer when you have so much design input? And it's the question of the myth of the singular designer, which we always have, and then maybe I would be interested first in your answer, and maybe you could, from a design perspective, say, how do you deal with crediting the people involved in this dialogue, as you described it so well, and maybe also for Philip to, you know, how's that creditation? How did you come across it in terms of practices in Portugal?
Well, it's true that when you work for a fashion brand, I think it's so embedded in the mentality and our world that you are working for a fashion brand and you kind of like tend to forget your name and being credited. We have a clause in our contracts that say that everything we think of or imagine or draw or envision while under that contract remains within the company. You're not supposed to take it with you, you're not supposed to claim it later. And there is a lot of kind of like creative jealousy in this field. I have gotten fired for being, for taking certain freedom or for having certain connections to other people, important people in the business, or for being out there and having a voice of my own by a certain designer that couldn't deal with it. So I have gotten used to it. I don't necessarily claim designing this or that. I know what I do. I'm very proud of what I do, and I know that at the end of the day, people know that I'm the one doing it, or I show my portfolio and I can tell, people can tell where it comes from. So I don't necessarily have the need, the personal need of saying that, oh, I made this or I did that. I know that the people who are important will know. But it's very normalized in the business. So.
Si, comment tu crédites en fait? Qu'est-ce que tu en penses de créditer?
qualité, en fait, ce dialogue entre toi et ton travail et les autres qui participent et qui
à la création.
Oui. Ouais.
Peut-être pour moi c'est un peu plus particulier parce que je fais presque tout dès le début, c'est-à-dire même le design textile, je fais beaucoup de recherches en design textile, je fais mes sketchs, c'est-à-dire il y a beaucoup de choses que je contrôle moi-même. Et comme mon équipe est encore toute petite, donc il y a beaucoup de choses que pour moi de ce côté-là c'est plus facile. Mais après, je pense que dans la création, c'est quand même c'est compliqué de contrôler certaines choses. Je pense qu'une fois que la création est sortie, je pense que ça devient plus impossible de contrôler derrière tout ce qui se passe.
Mais j'ai l'impression, Armine, tu me dis si je me trompe, que toi tu crédites le plisseur, par exemple, que tu mentionnes. Moi je l'ai vu plusieurs fois dans tes posts Instagram ou Internet, oui. Tu crédites le plisseur en disant que c'est lui qui m'a appris ou
Ah oui, je parle beaucoup de ce côté-là, oui. Je parle par exemple avec qui je travaille, je peux parler de mes artisans, je peux parler de ça. Mais c'est vrai que parfois on a peur de dire certaines choses oui, dans la mode, on a peur de créditer certaines personnes parce qu'on pense que voilà, ils vont peut-être avoir beaucoup de travail, peut-être ils vont plus pouvoir travailler même avec nous parce que il a ça, parce qu'il a beaucoup de compétition, il a beaucoup de...
Yeah, you give your sources.
Oui, beaucoup.
You don't say who made it because you want to keep it for yourself.
De ce côté-là, oui, c'est parfois, oui. Mais je le fais parce que pour moi, la transparence est important, la traçabilité, et comment je fais, avec qui je collabore, qui fait les vêtements. En fait, aujourd'hui, je pense qu'on en parle beaucoup. Mais je comprends pourquoi certaines marques n'en parlent pas. Oui, parce qu'il a ce côté même exclusif, on ne veut pas très montrer, on ne veut pas dire avec qui on travaille. Mais ça doit changer, je pense. Oui.
Yeah, I agree. I hope I think also it really has to change. And I think a lot of smaller brands are already showing, there's like a little bit, but it's too less, And I think everybody in fashion knows that this is really bullshit, that the creative director is guiding a team, and everybody in fashion knows that. I think it's just like a very cultural thing, like you said, it's like we still live in this idea of the creative genius, blah blah. I think it's to communicate design out there, otherwise maybe it would get too complicated, although everybody in fashion knows how. Who makes this,
It's an industry of image. We're selling, we sell clothes, but clothes are sold through an image, to a dream. Exactly. And selling this idea of a creative director who, we're not in the time anymore of le créateur de mode like Saint Laurent or Christian Dior back in the day, when they were like really sketching, like they were sketching themselves like you are, but I have worked with a lot of designers who are not capable of taking a pencil and drawing a sketch. So
this image is still
it's a too puissant, like all-powered person, and we tend to put aside the fact that there's 60 people working on a collection, and we all do. I depend on the modeliste, I depend on the cutter, I depend on the mechanician, I depend on the embroiderer, and so we're a chain. I'm part of a chain, I'm part of a team. And I always say that when it comes to my work, when I text or I WhatsApp with the embroiderers that I work with, I always say we. Can we do this? can we draw this? Can you start, like, can we start this? I'm part of their team as much as they're part of our team. And this is kind of like a win-win situation. And I never say, oh, you should be doing that. No, I say, we should be doing this, and we put it together, and you get a much better answer on that. And I did it this morning. I need swatches for Tuesday morning. I send the notes today. They don't even have the fabric yet. And I called the supplier and I say, we need to perform a little miracle here. And we're gonna do it together, okay? And I say, I know I'm sending you these things really, really late. I need them Tuesday night in Paris. Get it out Saturday night. I get it delivered. And we're gonna work on this together. If you need any answer from me at Saturday, 2 a.m. in the morning, you call me and I'll answer. Because I know I'm pushing them to deliver and to the extra mile. I cannot say, oh, sorry, I'm not working on Saturday. And I'm not gonna get you your answer, because in that case, I'm not gonna get what I'm asking for. But I don't think that we're still there on the larger picture. I think that still fashion tends to believe that it's one person doing it all, when we're really a big team. And it's a team within the studio, within the brand itself, because I depend on the guy cutting the fabric in the stockroom for me. I don't go downstairs and cut the fabric myself. I depend on the guys in the courier room who are gonna ask for the coursier, do the shipments. I depend on the manufacturer getting the things for me. We're all connected, interdependent, and unfortunately, that image, it's exploited in certain ways. When it's glamour and when it's fancy and when it's chic, but we don't show the factories. We show the in the communication on Instagram. Yeah, you'll see the fashion show and you see the backstage, and you see the models being dressed, but you don't see us when it's like 3 a.m. and we're like, we didn't sleep for 2 days and we didn't eat for 3, and we're like, oh my god, the machine broke and we need to fix it, so call the machine guy, make him come at like 2 a.m. in the morning. We don't show that. We don't show the struggles.
J'aimerais compléter parce que oui, je suis entièrement d'accord avec elle. Par exemple, les difficultés que j'avais dès le début de la création de la marque, c'était, je disais, il y a des fabricants qui ne veulent pas travailler avec des gens créateurs, et en disant, on travaille avec cette maison, etc. Donc on ne prend pas des créateurs inconnus, etc. C'est-à-dire ils ont pris tout le marché, ils contrôlent tout, et c'est-à-dire pour arriver à entrer même dans ces ateliers, dans ce secteur, c'est presque tellement privé que ça nécessite beaucoup de travail, beaucoup de recherche, même de trouver des solutions, etc. Alors que ça pouvait être plus simple, ouais. Ça pouvait être plus simple, plus ouvert, oui. Mais c'est vrai que oui, il a ce côté idéalisé, le directeur artistique, alors que derrière, moi par exemple, je sais que si mon plisseur ne fait pas mes plissés, si mon brodeur ne fait pas, je sais pas, le travail correctement, ça donnera pas la qualité, ça donnera pas ce que j'ai imaginé. Donc déjà, respecter ces gens, respecter tout ce travail, toute cette équipe qui travaille jour et nuit, parfois avant les défilés, on peut faire des nuits blanches, ça peut arriver, mais au moins les valoriser et faire en sorte qu'ils soient plus motivés pour travailler derrière eux.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être qu'on peut continuer les questions autour d'un verre et des keynotes. Juste pour vous rappeler, déjà merci infiniment, c'était passionnant, complémentaire, très inédit aussi. Ce que vous nous avez raconté, c'est pas ce qu'on lit dans la presse, c'est pas ce qu'on lit dans les médias. Voilà, j'ai trouvé ça vraiment, vraiment fascinant. Donc merci infiniment. Et juste pour rappeler à ceux qui ont résisté, qui sont toujours là, que les prochaines séances de notre séminaire ont lieu le 6 octobre et on parlera du Made From. Et je pense que plein de choses ont été dites déjà aujourd'hui. On parlera plus des textiles, la soie, le cuir, d'où ça vient, qui le fait. Donc revenir un peu sur les textiles. Et en décembre, le 1er décembre, c'est sur Made by, qui fait la mode. Donc les ouvriers, les immigrés, les étrangers, les femmes, la question du genre, donc plus les hommes et les femmes. Donc merci infiniment et n'hésitez pas, on a du vin, de l'eau, des noix de cajou.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very
I think
much.
it's a perfect illustration of this, what we want to do here, deconstructing the notion of Paris fashion, really looking what's behind, not one person, not one country. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.